Thank you, Chandrima, for inviting me to introduce Lata. It's really an honor, but I would like to just take 1 minute first to turn around and thank Chandrima and her team for a great job. And I will also like to thank McMaster University and from her department to social science, humanity faculty and everybody. I mean, I saw the list. They have done amazing job. So they also deserve our thank you. This is an amazing conference. The word is history, memory, grief. And what I have heard, I could have added the word there, healing at the end. But there is a other, current theme running all the time, and that is history, culture, power. The conference is about what happened, where happened, the victims. But if you want the question why, then history, culture, power comes into play. So really I'm hoping, I have learned by talking to Chandrima, her aim and objective, that in the proceedings of this conference and like others like it, and particularly the life and the working of individual people who have been impacted, the story of opening a school, poetry, writers, this will become the most important resource if Canada and Canadians ever want to understand the map and the meaning of multiculturalism. It's not just about Air India 82. It's about Canada, and every disaster impacts the whole country, and it is a learning process. So I hope that it will have a lot to teach us, really. Now, to introduce Lata. Lata is an award-winning dancer, teacher, and choreographer. She made her home in Canada 50 years ago. She established a Sampradaya Dance Academy. So she is the first generation of Indo-Canadians to establish dance academy in Canada. And in 2015, it was the 25th anniversary. And this is one of the most rigorous dance programs with 11-year curriculum. And basically, she has trained a whole new generation of dancers who are performing and doing their own dance. Lata has won many awards, Order of Canada in 2010, a Pravasi Bharatiya Samman Award by Presidents of India. She has also Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee, and a number of other awards which I would not go into detail. But after 1985, when the tragedy hit, like many others, and she lost her husband, Vishnu Pada, and her two daughters, Brinda and Arati. Life put her on a different path. She has persevered, she has survived, she has learned dance, and she became an eloquent spokesperson for the victims of the families, herself being a victim, pushing the Canadian government for the trial, for the inquiry. So she has taken a whole different role. And I really did not know, honestly, that her whole dance learning program came afterward. She has a master's degree from York University in dance. She has also is an adjunct professor there. And to her credit, she has a number of things, interview on CBC, TV Ontario, Vision, Rogers, Omni, and so on. You know that, really. Now, if it was any other evening, these words may suffice to introduce Lata. But honestly, once Chandrima asked me to introduce, I kept thinking about it. This is not another night. We just had a conference about death, devastation, and life after. What can I say? But knowing her perseverance and dance, and as a victim, I'm not talking about the whole picture, but she herself, if anything can help, then dance can help. Dance must help to survive. And when I talk about her, Indian dance, like all other dance, freedom to move and regimented movement, it is a punishing regime of exercise and engaging mind. So sometimes maybe it is possible for her to get away. And it reminded me really that Lord Shiva in Indian mythology, who using a kind of a a weak language or called the Lord of Death. It's not correct, but that's the way to put it. There must be a reason why he became Nataraj, the Lord of Dance. Maybe the Lord too needs healing, just like we human need. The other thing thought about it, that we are all afraid of death. And rightly so. It's not a weakness. Life is negation of death. We won't be here if we're not afraid. But there is the one person among us who is not afraid of death. Yes, there is the one person who is not afraid of death. We call her Mother. Given a chance, if the day ever came, a mother will stand right between her children and death and her family. She will challenge death, offers herself if the need be. And I know tonight there are many mothers here and fathers who would have done the same for the loss they have suffered. But death cheated them, did not give them a chance. So, ladies and gentlemen, tonight I present you a great artist, a great community leader, a survivor, a symbol of grace and perseverance, and above all, a mother, Lata Pada.
Good evening, Namaskar. Firstly, let me say what a great honor it is to be here in such a landmark event commemorating Air India 182. My deepest gratitude to Chandrima, Professor Chandrima Chakrabarti, for inviting me here today to make a presentation on my life through dance. I'm really, really sorry that I missed yesterday and earlier, and the sessions that were earlier held today. It's truly my loss, and I hope I can get a chance to watch the archives, because I'm sure as many of you who have attended today have seen so many different perspectives, so many different experiences, so many different interventions through art, through film, through poetry, through writing, recognizing the importance of the Air India Kanishka bombing in the history of Canada. And I'll speak more about that later, about my own journey trying to uncover what happened, why did it happen, and what could I, and as well as the other family members, do to prevent such a heinous act of crime from ever happening again in Canada. I thank the very many family members that are here today. I thank the many friends and supporters who are here this evening. And of course, each and every one of you for coming and for participating in truly such an important event, not just for the families, for the community, for Canada, for Canada's history. What you just saw was about 18 minutes of an 80-minute dance production that premiered in 2001 at what was then called the Premier Dance Theatre at Harbourfront Centre. This production opened on International Women's Day on March the 7th, 2001. And there was a reason behind that, and I will tell you more about that later. In 2003, Revealed by Fire traveled to India and toured 7 cities in India. And that was again another test of fire, but more about that later. It was an ordinary day. I was rehearsing. The phone rang. The phone rang. I was rehearsing. It was an ordinary day. On an ordinary day, the phone rang. As it rings for many of us, the phone rings. But that singular event, that piercing phone ring, transformed my life forever. It marked the journey of a deep personal and spiritual transformation, a journey that would in time reveal dance as the metonym of my existence and a return to wholeness. My life in dance became a pilgrimage, a sacred pathway towards a new revelation of my inner being. On June the 10th, 1985, I left Sudbury, where we lived at that time, a city located about a 4-hour drive from Toronto, for Bombay, to prepare for an important solo dance performance scheduled in Bangalore in July of 1985. My husband Vishnu and daughters Brinda, who was 18, and Arti, who was 15, were to join me in Bombay in 2 weeks, soon after Brinda had completed her high school graduation in Sudbury. But on that ordinary day in June, as I rehearsed in my guru's studio in Bombay, I received that fateful call. Air India Kanishka Flight 182 that was bringing my family to India from Toronto had exploded over the Atlantic Ocean, killing all 329 passengers aboard. A terrorist bomb placed in a suitcase had been suspected as being the reason for the downing of this flight. An unknowing victim of a heinous act of terrorism, the safe world of my home and my nuclear family had been violently destroyed. My identity as a wife and mother irrevocably altered. Life as I knew it had ended in the same fire that had consumed my beloved ones. Plunged into the depths of disaster, of despair and unspeakable pain, I was engulfed by the darkness and the futility of my own existence. Through the haze of sedation, pierced by searing memories of Vishnu, Brinda, and Arti, their faces, their voices, unanswered questions tormented me. Why me? Where and who could I turn to? How can I survive? Do I have a right to live? Life was a seemingly endless spiral of pain, anger, frustration, confusion, guilt, and overwhelming emptiness. I returned to dance intuitively and instinctively. The dance of death was now my dance of life. As I danced like a woman possessed, my conscious mind snuffed out the reality of my loss. While my world as wife and mother had been cruelly wrenched from me, I came to understand that my identity as a dancer had survived. The only thing that had survived. An identity that no outside force could destroy. As I willed movement into my paralyzed arms and legs, step by step, gesture by gesture, my still, numb body came to life. Dance became that singular lifeline that I clung to. My slow and painful return to normalcy was to plunge myself into dance, where the sheer physicality and fatigue left me spent, too exhausted to even contemplate my future without Vishnu, Brinda, and Arti. In this suspended state of a living death, I dealt with a debilitating sense of guilt for even continuing to survive in their absence. Encouraged by the calming presence and blessings of my guru and his wife, cradled by the love and compassion of my parents and siblings, I took my first steps on this journey of healing and renewal. Every movement and every gesture became incredibly potent with meaning, as the devotional lyrics and mythological themes that I had learnt, interpreted, and performed were experienced at a deeply metaphorical level. As I danced, inexplicably, the profound truths of these time-honored compositions resonated in my being, reawakening the wisdom of the philosophy of my Hindu upbringing, ultimately giving me the tools to cope with this unfathomable pain. And I came to understand very gradually that the path to wisdom begins with a broken heart. I was reminded of a 19th century minister, Henry Jackson Van Dyke, who wrote, and I quote, "In some realms of nature, shadows and darknesses are the places of greatest growth. The beautiful Indian corn never grows more rapidly than in the darkness. The sun withers and curls the leaves, but once a cloud hides the sun, they quickly unfold, and the shadows provide a service that even the sunlight cannot." After 5 years of intensive dancing and artistic reawakening, I emerged from my abyss of pain, prepared to embrace what is called the gift of wounding. I've been very inspired by this book written by psychologist Andre Au, where he offers the rationale for internalizing spiritual and emotional wounding as a gift. Dr. Au says, and I quote, "Saints and mystics are not the only ones who integrate suffering into their lives. Each one of us can grow beyond our pain to transform it into a hidden blessing. For many, the blessing is an opportunity to change direction and find new meanings in our lives and relationships. For others, it is a window to reconnect with our inner selves. And for many, it becomes the gift of a spiritual journey." I learned that my journey along the road to survival was marked by a number of intersections where I had to make a choice. There is not a single path that represents the perfect path. These paths lead us to many new destinations along our life's journey. For me, the gift was the alchemic restoration of my inner spirit. Living through the darkness and stepping onto a new path liberated me from my past. I am the journey, and the only way out is through. In May 1990, I returned to Toronto to embark on a new journey, a path of new opportunities to define myself and establish a career in dance. Assuming the role of teacher and artistic director, I charted a new life for myself, establishing and investing my passion, energy, and artistic vision in Sampradaya Dance Academy and the professional dance company, Sampradaya Dance Creations. We just celebrated our 25th anniversary for both organizations last year. Dance became my tribute to Vishnu, Brinda, and Arti, filling the void in my life with the presence of so many young dancers, many of them the ages of my 2 daughters. From that fateful day in June 1985, my Agni Pariksha, my test of fire, had initiated a process of self-reflection and self-renewal. I questioned my identity as a woman, my role as a wife and a mother, and my role as a teacher in society. At no point earlier in my career had I felt so prepared to channel my regained confidence, my new sense of self, into a dance production that would result in an unexpected and unimagined cathartic journey. In the making of Revealed by Fire, which you just saw excerpts of, I stepped onto a very difficult and uncertain path. This artistic journey was like no other that I have ever taken before. How could I negotiate the minefield of emotional, artistic, and collaborative challenges, let alone protect my vulnerable emotional center? Undeniably, it meant that I would have to return to a fragile past and perhaps a state of emotional instability. Artistically, it would mean entering an undefined territory of staging a production based on a personal narrative. So let me just speak about Bharatanatyam, the dance form that I have trained in. It is a form that developed in the temples of South India as a form of ritual worship. And later, through several decades of political and societal change, it became a performance art. I was initiated into Bharatanatyam at a very young age in my life, and it became, as you could see, and as I have shared with you, how important it became and central it became to my life. But Bharatanatyam, the compositions that we dance to are typically devotional compositions with lyrics that honor the various gods and goddesses that are part of the Hindu mythology. It interprets and elaborates on certain mythological themes that are part of our great epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, as well as the outpourings of saint poets from every part of India in every language possible. So, for me, it was formidable to think of telling my story on stage. And how would I be able to protect that very, very fragile condition that I would find myself in creating the work? It was, of course, a very difficult journey. I traveled to India with Silla von Tiedemann, who was my primary collaborator. And there were many unanswered questions for me. It was about the role of woman in society. So Revealed by Fire was not just about the Air India tragedy. It was also about my own investigation of woman in society and having to try to resolve some of those paradoxes that exist in India. For me, I could not resolve the veneration of goddesses in the temples and the denigration of women in society. And I saw it happen around me. I grew up in India. And as a young woman, I saw women in my own extended family, albeit a progressive, educated family. I saw women who had been widowed and the conditions that they had to face and surmount to establish their identity. And in many cases, they failed. So I questioned, what is it about those sacred symbols of marriage. What are those potent symbols of walking through? You saw that section with me walking on the rocks. That was really also about the ritual that happens in Hindu weddings, about the Saptapadi, where we have to place our foot on different small pieces of stone, symbolic, of course, about the stability of that relationship, of that bond that is now being forged between man and wife. And why is it then that the man who took the same vows as the woman did, circling that holy fire, suddenly the rules of the game change when she's widowed? In many ways, I too faced a lot of hypocrisy and unfair treatment of having lost Vishnu. And suddenly my own identity was in question. What were the events that I could participate in? Was I considered auspicious or not? We all know that. We've all been through that. We've all seen that. We've experienced it. We've read about it. But I was questioning it. So my travel through India with Scylla was trying to resolve these many unanswered questions. Unfortunately, what you saw was just 18 minutes, but there are large sections of this work that deal with the wedding ceremony, that deal with the stripping of a woman's identity, the smearing of the vermilion on her forehead, the breaking of that Mangal Sutra, the chain with the black beads that is put around her neck when she gets married. The return to, blotting paper white. And all those questions. I was even questioned how could I dare dance when I have gone through this terrible tragedy? How could I dance? Isn't dance about celebration of life? And here am I, bereft of the loss of my family, and I choose dance as my path to return to wholeness. So these were the questions, personal questions, that I was trying to resolve through this artistic work. So it was not about telling anybody else's story, but telling my story. And every time I stepped onto that stage, every time I went into the rehearsal hall, was a new day for me. I experienced a different set of challenges. I experienced a different set of emotional pain and uncertainty. There were days that the rehearsal ended in 5 minutes because I couldn't go through it anymore. But the biggest test for me was to take this work to India, where we all know that the rules of society are so different. And indeed, the most formidable challenge was to perform it in front of my guru in Bombay. Because what I did was absolutely unheard of. And I was truly worried about what he might say. But he was deeply touched and said to me, "I'm very proud of you." And that was enough for me. That was all I needed, because I had conviction in my work. I had conviction in the honesty and integrity with which I approached it. And much later, I realized the value of that production for myself. The catharsis that I experienced through Revealed by Fire was truly unexpected. And it helped me to to make peace with myself. But Dr. Rama Singh talked about my role as part of the families, the victims' families. And that was a parallel path that I chose to step onto with many of the other family members who, in unison, pushed the government for answers. And I'm sure it was talked about yesterday, so I won't repeat it, about the apathy and the indifference that we all experienced in the early years. We had, other than snatches of information about what could have happened, conjecture about who put the plot together, there were no answers. We heard horrible stories about CSIS erasing the tapes that were collected of the transcripts of the tapes between telephone conversations between those who were involved in the plot. We heard horrible stories about the rise of Khalistan in Vancouver and in British Columbia and parts of Ontario. And this was not the Canada that we knew. We were horrified to think that this was not acknowledged as a Canadian tragedy. And I'm sure, of course, people spoke about, did anybody speak about Rajiv Gandhi, Prime Minister Brian Mulroney's call to, yeah, they did, okay. Well, now we know what they thought of this. Because it was Air India. It was filled with brown people, all going to India. I mean, it had nothing to do with Canada. Nothing at all. We've, of course, known of the diabolic mistakes that they made at security, allowing this suitcase to get on board. A failed device that could have caught this bomb that was placed. I'm just sort of speaking off because I have no idea what was discussed yesterday and today. But we know that mistakes were made and nobody was owning up. It was not a Canadian tragedy. It had not pierced the consciousness of the government or the general public. This was Canada's 9/11. But nobody spoke about it. It was many years later, when 9/11 occurred, that the world suddenly woke up to the horrific reality of aviation terrorism. So we had a job cut out for us, the families, and we pursued it relentlessly. We all know what a travesty of justice it was when the two main accused were acquitted. We also know the lengthy and expensive inquiry that was held. And I do believe many recommendations were made, but I do believe they're all gathering dust in government files. And I don't know how many of them have been implemented or how many changes have been made. So I will end there. I had a little bit more to talk about the work, but I think the work speaks for itself, and I will be happy to answer questions.
Lata, I wonder if you can tell us about the reception of Revealed by Fire in Canada and India.
All right. It ran for 3 nights in Toronto. And Renee, tell me if I'm wrong, but weren't Malik and Bagri arrested in 2000? Yes. So there was already the two main accused, Bagri and Malik, were arrested in, I think, late 2000. So there had already been suddenly an interjection in the public's consciousness about Air India. Suddenly, the investigations had come to some stage where they were confident enough to arrest them. And so you can imagine months later, here is this production. And there was an expectation that Revealed by Fire would be about Malik and Bagri, but it never was. It was about my journey, my loss, and how dance became that anchor in my life. And weaving through it were the questions of womanhood and place in society. The reaction and the response was unprecedented. We had 3 sold out nights, and we could have had 2 more sold out nights, because I think it was, firstly, unprecedented on 2 accounts. Firstly, that there was a work, artistic work, a performance work that was dealing with a Canadian issue. And secondly, it was unprecedented for Indian dance. Such a story had never been told on the stage. Enormous, enormous amount of press. And it, Revealed by Fire, was voted the best dance production in 2000. Actually, in 2000. So there was a huge amount of interest and appreciation for the work. But for me, the most important were the letters and the emails that I received privately from audience members who were. And so the public sharing of personal grief, I think, is I'm sure was also discussed earlier. In India, it received attention that I had not expected. And every newspaper, every journal that dealt with the performing arts, about women in society, there was a huge amount, and we had sold out performances in every city in India. It was an important work. It was for Indian dance, particularly in Canada.
Thank you very much, Lata, for a very touching and eloquent presentation. My understanding is that this is the first time that there is any public discussion of this tragic event. And you were mentioning that many of the recommendations that were made by the investigative report are just sitting gathering dust. And I wonder if this conference should pass a resolution and take it to the next stage, whatever that may mean, perhaps going to the Prime Minister, that we as a group feel that more should be done, justice should be done, whatever we feel is appropriate wording. But I think this would be a good opportunity to take some steps. What would be your suggestion?
Well, the Kanishka Institute in Ottawa, that was referred to, I'm sure, by others in this conference, was supposed to do exactly that. I don't know. I think many of us have spent 30 years fighting this battle, and I don't know if there are many people who want to pick it up at this stage and push for it. But you're right. I mean, it needs attention, because it's such an act should never ever happen in Canada or anywhere again.
Thank you. You had mentioned, well, first of all, I would say thank you. Your presentation was amazing and overwhelming and very inspiring. You mentioned earlier that you specifically picked for your production, and I just wanted to know if you could elaborate on that.
Right. Well, as I said, a large part of the context behind this work was my own quest for answers about the inequity for women in society. And I was particularly looking at women in India and all the associated societal expectations and societal impositions on women in society in India. And having experienced it firsthand, I needed resolution about that. And there is, unfortunately, this one part that dealt a lot with the power of the goddess, which we didn't get to see. But my own surrender to that power and was my way of bringing that equanimity in my life and dealing with some of those unanswered questions that I was wrestling with right through my artistic journey. So it was an intersection of my own personal and my artistic. And so it actually just, I won't say it was coincidental, but it just was an attempt to try and make it happen on International Women's Day, because it was about women, it was about loss, it was about pain. And I'm not saying the Air India tragedy was, only confined to my loss, but it had to be my personal quest. That was the only way I could bring integrity to the work. So I had to resolve that for myself. The identity of a mother, of a wife, of a dancer, of a widow, all these were issues that I was dealing with in Revealed by Fire. So it seemed most appropriate to open on International Women's Day. So upon my return from India, I went back to India, as I said, instinctively and intuitively. I had to return to dance. I sold my home in Sudbury. And there are two people here that I'd like to acknowledge who've been part of this journey with me. Nirmala and Ashok Dalvi. Thank you. They've been my allies and my closest friends, and a sister and a brother through this whole pain, because they were with us in Indonesia. We lived in Indonesia, Vishnu, Brinda, and Arti and I, from 1969 to 1979. And Ashok and Nirmala came in 1976. And it was a bond of friendship that was forged in that distant, remote island in Indonesia. And we came back to Sudbury, they came back to Toronto, they went back to Indonesia, we lived in Sudbury, and we became, and they've been with me through this whole journey. So thank you, Nima. Thank you, Ashok. Upon my return from India, I invited Judith Rudikoff, playwright and dramaturge, to help realize the creative vision of the work. We spent many afternoons over tea, with Judith encouraging me to tell my life story. Much as I willed it, I could not keep a journal. I struggled putting to paper each fragment of memory of my loved ones. Every time I was interviewed, each word I spoke recounting my beautiful life with Vishnu, Brinda, and Arti would come alive with sharp, searing pain. So all I had was my memories, blunted with a subconscious urge to forget, to dull the pain. As a dramaturge, Judith needed to understand the context of my journey, and painstakingly, she and I worked through the themes for the narrative. She guided my ideas without ever pushing or indicating direction. The playtext that Judith crafted, which came organically out of our discussions and her instinctive understanding of my inner voice, was recorded in my voice in the work and integrated into the sound design. I was allowed, through the playtext, to become Lata, the central character of the work, as well as the storyteller who guided the narrative, infusing it with nuanced metaphors of transformation. The music for Revealed by Fire was a collaboration with R.A. Ramamani in India, a classical Carnatic music composer, and Toronto's Western classical composer Timothy Sullivan. I can never forget that afternoon that Timothy played a cassette which I had handed to him that morning. This cassette sat in my drawer for 15 years. It was a recording of the last phone message my older daughter Brinda had left on a friend's phone. It was a cheery message, and Brinda talked of the plane trip she was making to India that day and telling her about the fact that Mummy's already in India and we're leaving today and we're going to have a wonderful summer in Bangalore. And then we all know what happened, and the friend saved the message, recorded it onto an audio tape, and sent it to me months after June 1985. I could not bring myself to listen to it, and it lay unheard in the back of a drawer for over 14 years. Something told me that this message should be integrated into the sound design. Partnering the storyboard that Judith had created, Timothy created a multi-textured soundscape integrated into the score that mirrored my traumatic journey. Creating the choreography was one of the most difficult and emotionally draining challenges in designing movement for each of the sections. Even though my dancers had trained with me for several years and had grown very close to me, they were understandably hesitant and anxious about participating in a work that was so different from any that they had ever danced before. They comprehended the need and demand for their complete surrender to the emotional world of this new autobiographical narrative. My dancers wanted so much to honor me with being a part of my story on stage and pledged their uncompromising commitment. Sitting down with my dancers, I explained the personal and artistic scheme of Revealed by Fire in detail, breaking down and collectively dissolving into tears ever so often through the work. So it just touches on just the process.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. I will not take much time at this point, but I would like to make sure we can reiterate some of the thanks that we've already been hearing. Before that, I'd like to say that although it has been a quite long and intense 2 days, it's also been, I think we'd all agree, a quite inspiring and an incredibly generous gathering of just some really, really wonderful people, everyone here. And I'm so honored myself to have had this time with you, and I hope that everyone feels that way about one another. So in terms of thanks, I'd like to invite us to give Chandrima a really warm round of applause.
Everyone here made it possible. You can't have a thing like this with one person. Everybody here made it possible.
This is true, but it has been Chandrima's visioning and her incredibly thoughtful sort of working through of every possible scenario, and her commitment, and her really strong kind of galvanizing force that has made this possible. And I meant to say thank you so much to Lata before I started speaking, and I'm sorry. Thank you so much to Lata as well. Yes. So with Chandrima, I'd also like to thank in the back, I see there's Nisha, Sharifa, and Sarah. Could you please stand up? They are the rest of the... You've seen them throughout the conference. They're also the co-organizers, and they've done an incredible amount of work. And on site throughout the last 2 days, all of the volunteers, and there are actually too many names for me to go through, but thank you so much to all the volunteers. Including those people who have chaired and have introduced and have moderated and have done all kinds of wonderful stuff like that. I'd like to give a special thanks to Dr. Khurshid Ahmed, who has been our official conference photographer voluntarily. And he's also been, well, his family, they've been hosting a guest, which is really wonderful. Our videographers have not been thanked yet, so we have Daniel Brazil and David Boda, who's left. And then finally, just as Chandrima has said, one last really warm, really incredibly heartfelt thanks to everybody here. Again, nothing would have been possible without all of you making the commitment and having the courage to really come and do all of this work together. So thank you. And then one final note before we go, we will be in touch with everybody again once something of a digital archive is up and running. The first step in that, I believe, will be the conference proceedings themselves. So keep an eye out for an email from us again. And those of you who've presented, again, a really warm sort of encouragement to send us your written work, because we would love to include that. And I think we have heard from a number of people who couldn't make it, to the effect that they would love to see and hear and read along with you. So please send us what you have, and we will all be in touch. And thank you, and good night.